Welcome to the podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. I was going to talk about the 3 books I'm working on currently, and I'll get to that topic in a minute. But first I wanted to talk about voting, which seems very strange to raise in this podcast, but if anyone's listened to my prior podcasts, there's an underwriting, perhaps an overriding theme in these podcasts associated with regards to the stupidity of voting. There's a long story behind that, as with the case with many of my podcast stories, but certainly when I was a child growing up in Australia, voting was compulsory. Whenever I've recorded a podcast about compulsory voting, I've always had a good number of Australians that have just contacted me and said, well, Tom, you're obviously not a true Australian, and quite frankly, we've already had a narrative with regards to my perspective on being British in this podcast, so I don't need to really add anything more to that. But today, my wife and I went to collect the local shopping, and we noticed there was a group of people lining up to vote. They looked a lot like Republicans to me, and I think, quite frankly, the Republicans are coming out in force with regards to this election, because, quite frankly, they're not particularly happy with regards to the gentleman who's in the White House currently, and quite frankly, I can understand where they're coming from. I have lived in Las Vegas through multiple financial disasters, and unfortunately, the Democratic Party seems no friend of mine. It was no friend of mine when I lived in San Jose, and folks who've listened to this podcast for a continuous period of time will wonder even how I continued to live in San Jose for the length of time that I did. In any case, my view is that no migrant in this country, and I call myself a migrant, sometimes people query me and say, you're an immigrant, and I'm like, no, actually I just migrated here, I didn't immigrate here. There's a slight difference in those two words. Anyway, where was I talking about? Yes, the political system. There's no way a migrant to this country would ever vote. And yet, mysteriously, people still think that there's a population of people that come to this country through legal migration who would vote in the elections and would obviously vote Democrat, quite frankly. If you've lived in areas controlled by Democrats, you wouldn't vote Democrat. And my experience as a migrant to this country is the Democratic Party has never, ever tried to court me as a voter. In fact, when I lived in their ranks, I was astonished how little they tried to court me. You'd think an educated person who earned a reasonable salary would be exactly the kind of person you'd try to pull into your ranks, but instead they play these silly games with regards to another group of folks who come to this country, and there were a group of people voting today, and it was something I observed. Let us talk about the book projects, because they are probably a better topic with regards to the long funks. So there are 3 books as they are now. The first is a talk that I gave at a university that will remain unmentioned in this particular podcast in 2012. Quite frankly, this talk makes me want to cry. This talk was me at the top of my game, and nothing ever came of it. So it was quite extraordinary that this talk exists in written form, and it's going to be the first book of 3. Then we are into Just Plain Chaos, a book which I wrote in 1992. And a book which has taken me this long to get to any degree of popularity. Well, it doesn't even have popularity. It was certainly expunged from Wikipedia. And quite frankly, that's quite interesting when you think about the talk that I gave in 2012. Because that was before I was expunged from Wikipedia, and that was before all this nonsense happened. The whole thing just makes me want to cry. Anyway, so we then have Just Plain Chaos, a story which I've been trying to get out since, I don't know, 1992. It's a particular part of Just Plain Chaos. It's not the original story. It's the bit just done in the jungle, or Elands, as it is in reality. And it's quite an interesting story behind it, because it's a story which I've had to also expunge in some very profound way. And this story I wrote in 2019. It's the latest rendition of what was originally there, which was the writing about me going to a jungle training camp, potentially revolutionaries, potentially terrorists, potentially a wide variety of things. But I do actually cover that in the 3rd book, which is the Just Plain Chaos role-playing game rule set, which is really a podcast you think I'd record for My Rules Are Better, but I'm recording 2 separate podcasts to give the full benefit of everyone who listens into these podcasts, so you can at least hear a little editorialization about why I think voting is not a particularly promising pastime. So thank you very much for tuning into this podcast. It was pretty quick. I'm doing that because it's a Saturday, and I do like having a bit of time on my Saturday to do stuff with my wife and daughters. So, Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.